Well, we're back with another episode of the Room for Nuance podcast. I'm your host, Sean DeMars, and I'm here with...
Stephen Meyer
of...
the Discovery Institute and the Whewell Center for Science and Natural Theology in Cambridge, England.
Okay. We'll talk about all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me open us in prayer.
Yeah, thanks.
Father, thank you so much for our brother Stephen and for the life you've given him and the work you've called him to and the gifts that you've equipped him with to carry this out. As someone who's benefited from his ministry much over the years, I pray that you'll allow this conversation to increase that blessing to many. Help us to be confident that you are not only there, but that you are exactly who you say you are in your word, and that no powers or principalities or philosophies can stand against what you have clearly revealed in the book of nature and in the book of Scripture. Help me to be a careful listener and a good question asker in this interview, and help Stephen to be clear and persuasive and loving. And we pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
All right, brother. Well, on the room, actually, first let me tell you, this is like a top 5 bucket list interview for me. I'm so thankful for the work that you've done over the years.
Well, thank you.
I'm not a biologist nor the son of a biologist, but when I was a brand new Christian, I took a class that taught the theory of evolution, and it spun me upside down. I didn't know what to do, and then somebody gave me one of your books, and I've been paying attention to your stuff ever since then.
Oh, that's great.
I'm just really humbled to be here with you, man.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Well, let's start where we always start on Room for Nuance, with your evangelical bona fides. How did you come to know the Lord Jesus as your Savior?
For me, it was a protracted experience of questioning, some adolescent angst, and a long period of deliberation. Started in kind of middle of high school, and I didn't really settle in a sense of confident faith until my first year out of college. I started with a lot of had a number of metaphysical questions or philosophical questions that I didn't realize were philosophical questions. They were just things that were really bothering me as a 14-year-old. And I later worried that maybe, or while it was happening, I worried that maybe this is what it meant to be insane. And then I started to have a fear of the questions that gave me that fear. And I was really quite a mess for 6-8 months in the year after breaking my leg as a 14-year-old. I kind of gradually pulled out of that without any kind of real clear resolution. But then somewhere in my sophomore year in high school, I started reading the big fat white Catholic family Bible. And when I first opened it, it fell to the page with a picture of Jesus Christ between the two testaments, saying, with the verse underneath it, saying, "Come unto me, all ye who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And I think that sounded pretty good to me at the time. So my mind was spinning, and I started to read the New Testament. I started to read the Gospel of Matthew. I found that I couldn't digest more than about a chapter at a time, but I couldn't not read at least one chapter a night. It was somehow, something about it was settling me. And I later realized there was a kind of correspondence between the worldview implicit in the Bible and the questions that I had been having. And when I got to college, I majored in physics, I majored in geology, but I took as many philosophy classes as I could along the way. And in one of the courses I was I took a whole course on atheistic existentialism, encountered the work of Nietzsche and Sartre and others. And I remember our professor paraphrasing one of Sartre's maxims as without an infinite reference point, nothing finite has any lasting or enduring meaning. And I realized that had been one of the things that was really bothering me. I couldn't see what anything would, the question that kept bubbling up in my head was, what's it going to matter in 100 years? Anything that I worked on, there was a routine of life. You get up, you make your bed, you go to school, you come home, you do your homework again, and you do it all over again. Where is it all leading?
Ecclesiastes.
Yeah, exactly. I used to, then when I taught atheistic existentialism later as a philosophy professor, I would also have Camus and Sartre and Nietzsche, but also the book of Ecclesiastes, right? So anyway, those were the sort of things that were bothering me. And then I started to find that the Bible really addressed those kinds of concerns. I remember telling my professor, "Oh, I wasn't insane. I was just a philosopher." And he said, "Well, yes, but there's a fine line between philosophy and insanity." So, in any case, so any number of the things that were troubling me about how I could be confident that I was actually knowing the world the way it was, what was the meaning of time, the sense of the ultimate meaninglessness of things, apart from a personal God. I was on the Piers Morgan podcast a little while ago. My mom had just died, and we ended up talking about death and mortality, which was not the direction I expected the interview to go.
Yeah.
And he, I can't remember what he asked me, but I ended up saying that nothing can mean anything to a rock or to a planet or to even a DNA molecule. Things only mean things to persons. Something is meaningful to me as a person, or you as a person. So, and yet we all die. And this was the sense I had as a 14-year-old that, I was reading in the hospital after a broken leg, had a full leg cast. I was laid up for about 6 months. And my dad gave me a book on the history of baseball. I loved baseball. And it was all the stories of all the great players from the different eras. And after a while, it created that same sense of metaphysical anxiety. Every one of the players had the same kind of trajectory. They were all great baseball players, so they were scouted. They came up to the majors. They amassed records, so many home runs, some high lifetime batting average, whatever it was. And then 36, 38, they'd retire and live out the rest of their lives as celebrity athletes. But what was the point of all of that? What were those? The measure of their life was some numbers on a piece of paper. And then I talked to my mother about that, and she said, "Well, that's because they're just chasing a ball around. If you did something more significant, you wouldn't feel that way." But I got to thinking, well, what if I was a surgeon? What if I saved a lot of lives? But then I would die, and then those people would eventually die. And, it's sort of the idea that no graves go, all graves eventually are unvisited. We're all forgotten. So that was the one of the many things that kind of bothered me, and it bothered me so much that then it created this kind of cycle of anxiety and fear, and it was a kind of panic attack. And little by little, the exposure to the scripture, the biblical perspective, that there was a person whose existence preceded ours and would continue beyond our earthly time, our earthly deaths, our earthly mortality. And that, as I ended up telling Piers Morgan, that puts the whole question of meaning back on the table. Because there is someone, a transcendent person, to whom our lives can mean something eternally. Yeah. And that sort of, so, what I encountered in the scripture was passages like, Jesus Christ is the same today, yesterday, and forever. Or the Exodus 3 passage where Moses is at the burning bush, and asks, "Who should I say sent me?" And the voice from the bush says, "Tell them that I am has sent you." So this idea of an eternally self-existent person, it answered other questions I was having about the nature of time, or things that were bothering me about that. So I was very odd in a way, So, but eventually all this stuff started to settle, and I found that the biblical worldview answered questions about meaning. It answered questions about the foundation of knowledge, that because our minds had been made in the image of the same loving Creator who had made the same loving and rational Creator who built rationality and order and design into the world, that there was a principle of epistemological correspondence that meant that there was a basis for knowledge, that we could know the world that God had made because he'd made our minds to know it. Whereas the post-Enlightenment, we've had this crisis of knowledge and philosophy, and you have this sort of sense that there's no basis for scientific realism or objective knowledge because we have no basis for trusting in the reliability of our minds. And so anyway, the faith answered a lot of philosophical questions for me. I was captivated with the person of Jesus, and by about my 23rd, 24th year, I finally settled. So it was the last thing in the world from a Damascus Road experience. I kind of overthought everything. But
I, as a pastor, one of the cool things about my job is every membership interview I conduct with a prospective member of the church, we hear their testimony. And I got to tell you, the Damascus Road experiences are very few and far between.
Yeah.
Even my wife's own experience, when she tells her testimony, she says, I don't know when it happened, but I know that it happened. I know I went from this to this. I think it happened within this time frame, but I can't pinpoint it. Yeah. Now, you're an intellectual.
You might not have accepted me into your church, though, if you'd have heard my testimony. So,
do you think you're a sinner who's been saved by grace?
Well, I do.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So, how did you get into the field that you're in now? Walk me from that to today.
Well, after I graduated from college, I moved to Dallas, Texas. I had gone to college in the rainy Northwest, and we had a lot of. In college, I had a lot of friends that were very happy to wallow in existential despair with me. And I got to Texas. It was the 80s, and Reagan was president. The economy was booming, and there were all these young people my age who were entrepreneurs. The sun was out, and there was all this can-do attitude around me. And about the same time, I was settling in my faith, feeling more confident, and I just started to get a desire to do something for God, to serve God, and I started praying very much about that.
Okay.
And there was a wonderful conference that came to Dallas featuring Os Guinness and Francis Schaeffer, and I had taken courses on their books in college. I was able to meet Schaeffer briefly, and Os Guinness was extremely very kind to me and took some time to talk with me and help me kind of find a little bit of my direction. And then 2 years later, a conference came to Dallas called Christianity Challenges the University, an international conference of atheists and theists. And at this conference, the big questions were being discussed. The origin of the universe, the origin of life, and the origin and nature of human consciousness. And the panels that were addressing these and the scholars and the scientists that were addressing these were divided on each topic between those who believed in God and those who were more of a materialist or naturalist point of view, philosophically speaking. And I was blown away by some of the talks, especially by the scientists who were advocating a theistic interpretation of the scientific data in their area, the evidence that we have for the beginning of the universe, the evidence for the complexity and informational complexity of the interior of the cell, and so that's where I first encountered scientists who were, roughly speaking, supportive of the idea of intelligent design, though it wasn't called that at that time. The origin of life scientists were talking about the information stored in the DNA seemed to be pointed to some kind of intelligent cause. They said there must be an intelligence behind this. Information is a mind product was kind of the intuition. And I also heard the great astronomer, astrophysicist, cosmologist, Alan Sandage, make his first public profession of Christian faith. He was a longtime hard-bitten scientific materialist. He wasn't an atheist per se, but he was a Jewish agnostic, and one of the great scientists of the 20th century. He had been Edwin Hubble's PhD student and had been intimately involved in verifying the expansion of the universe. And in all the different quadrants of the night sky. He was key to establishing the empirical basis of the expanding universe, and therefore the idea that the universe had also, in the reverse direction of time, would have to go back to a beginning point. And he gave a talk on the evidence for the beginning of the universe. And then I remember him saying, here is evidence for what can only be described as a supernatural event. No way this could have been predicted within the realm of physics as we know it. You can't explain the origin of the physical universe by reference to physics, because there's no physics yet in existence.
Yeah.
And so I found this incredibly fascinating. A little film company asked me to write a script with the idea of making a documentary. They didn't have enough resources to pull it off, and I was off to grad school by the fall. But I was very interested. That's where the idea of the return of the God hypothesis germinated for me. And
Which, for those who don't know,
that's with my latest book, 2021. The idea of it germinated in 1980. This was 1985.
Yeah.
So
the year before I was born.
Yeah, and the film about that has now come out in the form of The Story of Everything, which will be released in theaters April 30th this year.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did you get from there to Cambridge?
Well, it was a weekend very soon after that conference. Maybe it was the weekend before. I can't remember. But layoffs were announced for most of the big oil companies. I was a geophysicist for Atlantic Richfield Company, and the price of oil had dropped from 32 to 8. It was one of those, dramatic market shifts that affects that industry in particular. And I was fairly early in my career, and that was, I think, February. And by the middle of the summer, I had all these writing projects that were coming to me because of having attended this conference. I met one of the key origin of life scientists, a chemist, Charles Thaxton, who happened to live in Dallas, and he had started to meet with me and discuss these things and mentor me. So by the time the fall rolled around and I actually got laid off, I was hoping to get laid off because I had so many projects, and I had applied for a Rotary scholarship to go to study a year abroad. I was hoping for Oxford or Cambridge. I had applied the year before and was the runner-up to Miss Texas, which was quite significant or interesting. But anyway, this year, that second time around, I did get the scholarship. By Christmas time, I learned that I'd been accepted that I'd been given my choice of Cambridge, and then I was accepted at Cambridge in the spring. So it was kind of a year-long period of uncertainty about what the next steps were going to be. But the good people of the Rotary Club of Dallas gave me a scholarship that got me to Cambridge to do a year-long master's degree in history and philosophy of science. And then most of the way through there, I was accepted into the PhD program and then stayed to do the PhD as well.
What made you decide to pursue this course of study, the history and philosophy of science?
My brother-in-law worked for a company called People Management, Inc., and they had a concept which was motivated abilities. And people would come to them for guidance, vocational guidance, and say, well, I'm trying to figure out what I should do with my life.
Okay.
And they put them through a series of tests which were basically designed to get people to reveal what they did when they weren't watching, that they did just instinctively, where they sort of what they were designed to do. And when I was working as an oil company geophysicist doing seismic digital signal processing, which was an early form of information technology, which was also one of the reasons I got interested in the origin of life question. If I had been watching myself carefully, I would notice that I was really interested in writing about ideas. And so I would rush home in the evening and write op-eds. I would spend my lunch hours in the company library working on writing projects. And my background was largely science and philosophy. I was very interested in politics and economics as well, but it seemed like the thing I should be writing about was the thing I knew best. And so I discovered that there was a field called the history and the philosophy of science, which is where you would write about the history and the philosophical issues that arise from scientific investigation and scientific discovery. So that's where I kind of cast my lot, and there was a wonderful program at Cambridge to which I was accepted, and that's how I got started.
At what point, either in your master's or PhD studies, did the dam break and you realize, oh, this is the direction I'm going in, intelligent design stuff?
Well, it really happened. It partially happened the year before. It was I first encountered the idea of intelligent design at this conference in the February of 1985, and the cosmological discussion was really about the ultimate creation of the universe, and I was very struck with how strong the theistic argument was. That the theists seemed to, in all the panels, seemed to have the intellectual initiative, and that surprised me. I'd come from a small Christian college, and oftentimes people that come from those environments can feel kind of intellectually insecure, like there's a big bad world out there where there's where people know things that you weren't told. But it was kind of the opposite. There was far more evidence for the theistic position than I realized coming out of the sciences. And then the second panel was about the origin of the first life. Charles Thaxton, who had written a book the year before called The Mystery of Life's Origin, was on that panel with his co-authors. And another man named Dean Kenyon, who was at the time one of the leading chemical evolutionary theorists. And he similarly surprised everyone by sitting down on the theistic side of the panel. And in his talk, he said that the evidence that we have of the complexity of the cell and of the information stored in the large biomacromolecules, DNA, RNA, and proteins, suggests that it may be time for the theologians and the philosophers to reopen what he called the natural theological question, which is nature pointing to God? And so I, again, was just kind of, it was one of those things, it rocked my young world. I thought, this is just fascinating stuff. And so as I got to know more about the informational properties of DNA, and I met regularly with Thaxton, I decided that I wanted to work on this problem of the origin of the first life. How do you get from the non-living chemicals in a prebiotic ocean or prebiotic soup to the first living cell? It was clear by the mid-'80s that the whole field of origin of life research or chemical evolutionary theorizing or theories had reached a point of impasse. And it remains that way to this day, now 40 years on. But it was a fascinating question, and I was intrigued with the argument for intelligent design. They hadn't called it intelligent design, but some sort of intelligent cause or the natural theological question, that information seemed to point to a mind, perhaps, but it seemed like there wasn't a rigorous argument there yet. It was more of an intuition. And so I set out with a kind of burning question in my mind: is it possible to make a rigorous scientific argument for intelligent design as the best explanation for the information that we see at the foundation of life in every living cell? And so that led me into the field of history and philosophy of science. I did my master's degree thesis on origin of life biology, on the history of the field, and then I wrote a longer PhD thesis on origin of life biology, looking at both the history, the methodology of origin of life research, and the scientific theories themselves.
And so when you finished that, did you come out of that kind of baptized as the intelligent design guy, or?
No, I had simply established, by a careful study, I'd established how scientists thinking about questions of origins reason. How do they do their scientific research? How do they investigate? How do they test their ideas? It's different than bench science. You can't repeat the origin of life under controlled laboratory conditions. Yeah. You can't repeat many archaeological events or events in cosmology. So there's my thesis was really about the historical scientific method or methods that are used to investigate events that have occurred in the remote past. How do you do that with scientific rigor?
Yeah.
But what it did is established a method that I then was later able to use to make the case for intelligent design happens to be the exact same method that Charles Darwin used in The Origin of Species. It's a theoretically neutral method, but the point was, the question in my mind was, is there a rigorous scientific method, an appropriate scientific method that could be used to make a case for intelligent design? And then in my first few years out of the PhD work, I began to write articles and meet other scientists who were intrigued with intelligent design, and that's where we began collectively to develop the scientific case for intelligent design, using the very methods that I had
studied during your
studied
master's
during my
PhD.
master's and PhD that were used by evolutionary scientists.
So we've kind of thrown this around a lot, and we might just assume that everyone knows what intelligent design is, but just in case they don't.
Let us start. We should have started there, right?
That's my fault. Sorry, I'm the interviewer.
No, that's fine. It's a quick hit definition. Intelligent design is the theory that there are certain features of life and of the universe that are best explained as the result of a designing mind or intelligence, as opposed to an undirected material process, such as in the realm of biology, natural selection acting on random mutations. Mm-hmm. So it's the propositions that there are features of living systems, our planetary system, the universe, that are correctly interpreted as having been produced by a designing mind.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So when you first started working on this project with other scientists to establish, what was the phrase you used earlier? The scientific validity or something like that?
Yeah. Is there a rigorous scientific argument?
Yeah.
Or basis for intelligent design, for the conclusion that life was designed by an intelligent agent?
I'm guessing you had a strong intuition that yes, there was, but half the battle then is proving it on paper so that your peers can see it and recognize
Exactly.
it.
When I set out to Cambridge for my master's degree, I was intrigued but not fully convinced by what I had learned from Thaxton and Kenyon and Walter Bradley, these early founders of the intelligent design research community and movement, if you will, because this came out of their work on the original life problem.
Yeah.
But I was not yet, what I hadn't worked out yet was how can this be made into a rigorous scientific argument, as opposed to something that seems highly intuitive, but not yet, I won't say demonstrable, because we don't demonstrate things with absolute certainty in science, but compelling from an empirical and a scientifically rigorous point of view. What were the modes of reasoning and scientific method that justified the conclusion that we were looking at features of design systems?
So how'd you do it? What was the strategy?
Well, the first thing was oddly, I was mentored by Charles Thaxton in Dallas, but the person that helped me most during my PhD thesis was Charles Darwin, and studying carefully the historical methods of reasoning that he employed in The Origin of Species, and the antecedents to that in his mentor, another Charles Lyell, the great geologist. Lyell, in the front piece of one of his on his book Principles of Geology, it had a long subtitle, being an attempt to explain the former changes on the Earth's surface by reference to causes now in operation. So if you want to explain an event in the remote past, something that took place on the Earth's surface, or anything else for that matter, we want to posit causes that are known to produce the effect in question. That was the key methodological principle of historical scientific reasoning. Example, I went to college in Eastern Washington. In the Palouse country, the wheat fields of Eastern Washington, you can still occasionally come across little patches of white powdery stuff that might puzzle you if you didn't know the historical background. And if you didn't know the historical background, you'd have to use the historical method of reasoning to try to figure out what happened. What produced these white patches of white powdery stuff? Well, It might be that it was an earthquake. Might be that it was a great hailstorm or rainstorm. It might be that it was. It might have been a volcanic eruption. Of those three possibilities, what constitutes the best explanation? Well, earthquakes don't make white powdery stuff, and rainstorms don't make white powdery stuff. But volcanic eruptions are known to do that. And so positing a volcanic eruption to explain the origin and presence of, as it happens, volcanic ash on the Palouse country ends up being the best explanation. So you can infer from the effect, the white powdery stuff, back to the cause based on our knowledge of cause and effect. And that was Lyell's principle. That was what he meant by uniformitarian reasoning, that the present is the key to the past. Our present knowledge of cause and effect allows us to infer events that took place in the past based on the present clues that they've left behind.
Doesn't that assume a lot? Doesn't that assume that conditions today are equal to what they were in the past?
It assumes that the basic laws of physics and chemistry, the basic way that nature works, is uniform and constant. Yes.
Okay.
That's the principle of uniformitarianism or uniformity that undergirds all of science. And it's also a principle that came directly out of a biblical worldview. The idea that the God of the Bible is a God of order, and the God of the Bible is unchanging, and the God of the Bible upholds the universe by the word of his power. So this kind of theology of nature that gave rise to science hatched this same principle. And so there are Christians who object to it on the basis that they may not like some of the deliverances of science, particularly about the age of the earth.
Yeah.
But it's odd that they're objecting to a principle that came directly out of a Christian theology of nature, which gave us science in the first place.
Okay, so you guys are together. You're looking at Darwin. You're looking at Lyell. But do you have a first case study that you begin to explore? Do you focus primarily on DNA, or?
I was thinking about DNA the whole time.
Okay.
Yeah, and it wasn't. This was kind of. I was thinking about all this in isolation during my master's and PhD, thinking of, with this underlying question: could the design argument be made rigorous? Could it be formulated in a rigorous way based on these new discoveries about the information-bearing properties of living cells and the integrated complexity of living cells? When I finished my PhD in 1990, it's a general study of the methodology of historical scientific reasoning, and the case studies I look at entirely come out of evolutionary biology or origin of life research. That is to say, chemical evolutionary theory.
Yeah.
But as I think more deeply about it and continue to ponder the design question, I begin to realize that this method of reasoning can underwrite a strong case for intelligent design. Let's just take the Lyellian principle. If we want to explain present phenomena by causes that we know to be capable to produce the effect in question, by causes now in operation, that raises a question, which is, what is the cause of the digital information that's stored in the DNA molecule? There was I came across a quotation, a passage in the writings of a scientist who was a kind of pioneer in the application of the information sciences, informational analysis to molecular biology. His name was Henry Quasler, and he said that the creation of new information is habitually associated with conscious activity. And I thought, well, wait, that's the Lyellian idea. This is what we know from our uniform and repeated experiences.
Yeah.
Habitually associated as uniform and repeated experience.
Right.
So we know that minds can generate information. And by this time, I also knew that all the various attempts that had been made to explain the origin of the information in DNA and RNA that are necessary to make the first living cell had failed. All the evolutionary attempts had failed. The chance idea was no longer held by any serious origin of life researcher. There was simply too much information in living systems to have arisen by random means. Right. And I've run the math on that in Signature in the Cell, and people can look into that. But no serious origin of life researcher today thinks that that's how life arose. natural laws didn't seem to be a good candidate because laws describe highly repetitive ordered patterns, and the kind of information in DNA, like the kind of information in a human sentence or paragraph in a book or even a section of software code, the characters in those informational sequences are not highly repetitive. They're not like mantras where you say the over and over again. They're highly complex in the sense that they're aperiodic and unpredictable, and yet highly specified in order to perform some independent function. So the other possible way of explaining the information was by reference to some sort of process of law-like necessity, but that didn't work either. And if you combine the two, put the chance and necessity together, that didn't work for another reason. And so you had these three basic approaches to explaining the origin of information that are the kind of the approaches that are in every scientist's toolbox. There was a famous book by Jacques Monod called Chance and Necessity. And he said, and the argument was, if you're going to explain something scientifically, you should explain it by reference to chance-based processes, or what sometimes they call it the stochastic processes, or by reference to repetitive law-like processes, or the combination of the two. And by the time I got through my PhD, I realized that there had been attempts to explain the origin of life and the origin of information that represented each of those three strategies. And they all failed for very profound, both empirical and theoretical reasons. And so then I thought, well, is there anything else of which we know that can produce information? And then Henry Quasler hit me right between the eyes, and there is.
Consciousness.
It's conscious intelligence.
Yeah.
Which took me back to Thaxton and Bradley and Kenyon, the early, I think, key founders of the intelligent design idea.
Yeah.
And in modern terms, in modern times, and realized that, using the Lyell-Darwin method, we can make a very powerful case for intelligent design as the best explanation of the information-bearing properties of DNA and RNA. Because of what we know about the cause and effect structure of the world. We know of only one cause that can produce information of the kind we find in DNA. We call that specified or functional information, to distinguish it from a merely mathematical concept of information that came out of the engineering sciences associated with a man named Claude Shannon. But the kind of information we have in DNA has only one known cause. And that allows us, upon observing that kind of information, to infer back to the presence of that necessary cause. And so this is a very strong form of inference. And I started to develop the case for intelligent design using these methods of reasoning that I had studied. And the first positive article, the first article I wrote making a positive case for intelligent design was published in 1996, 6 years after I.
Did you coin that term?
What's that?
Did you coin that term?
What, intelligent design? No, that came out of a conference in 1989 that Charles Thaxton convened.
Okay.
And it was sort of a group conversation, but the sense was that we wanted to be clear about the framing of the argument. We didn't want to argue any longer over, as many Christians were, about how do we interpret the days of Genesis? Are they young? Is it a young earth? Is it an old earth? Is this a long period of time, a short period of time? Because that wasn't the key issue. The key issue was not how long ago did God create. It was whether or not there was any evidence of creative intelligence acting in the history of life at all, versus the Darwinian view that there's no evidence of design in nature.
Right.
The Darwinists, Richard Dawkins famously said in The Blind Watchmaker in 1986, about the same time, a little before, he says, biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Mm. And the key word for him, of course, is appearance. It's an illusion, the illusion of design. Why? Because in the Darwinian scheme of things, there's an unguided, undirected process that can produce the appearance of design without itself being designed or guided in any way. And that was the proposition we wanted to challenge. Yeah. We wanted to say, no, there's evidence of real design, actual design, intelligent design, not unguided, undirected, mindless processes, but intelligent design. So there's many aspects to Darwinian theory, or the idea of evolution can mean change over time. It can mean continuous change such that the history of life is best represented as a great branching tree. That's the idea of universal common descent. But the third meaning of evolution is the idea that there's an undirected, unguided process that produces all the forms of life we see and the appearance of design that they manifest. And we wanted to be clear. We're challenging meaning of evolution number 3.
And what was the response to that first article?
Pretty good. It wasn't widely read. I published 2 more articles advancing the case in '98. Then a more widely read article in the journal First Things in 2000. A lot of my colleagues were by this time publishing really important seminal books. Michael Behe's Darwin's Black Box was published in '96. William Dembski published a book called The Design Inference with Cambridge University Press in 1998. And his work especially beautifully complemented mine because he had developed a method of design detection that was rooted in the information sciences, in complexity theory and information and probability theory. And it enabled us to characterize the effect that we were trying to explain with more precision, a certain kind of information. I made this distinction a minute ago between functionally specified information and mere Shannon information. Shannon information, you could represent any sequence of characters. Think of the monkeys at the typewriter. Any sequence of characters will have a quantifiable amount of Shannon information. It's just a measure of the improbability of the sequence. It doesn't tell you whether the sequence is functional or meaningful in any way. Or whether it communicates anything, whether it performs a communication function. So I always represent Shannon information. Functional information has Shannon information, but it has something more.
Yeah.
And what it has is a specificity of arrangement that allows the sequence as a whole to perform an independent function. And that's the kind of information we have in computer code. It's the kind of information that we're transmitting to each other right now as we speak.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of information that's in DNA. And Francis Crick himself was quite adamant about this when he said that the information in DNA, we said that there was information in DNA, he insisted that we were not talking about mere Shannon information, but he said we're talking about the specificity of arrangement of the characters to perform a function. And so Dembski's work helped characterize what we were trying to explain. And then when we married that with the inference to the best explanation methodology that I had learned in grad school, we were we were able to make I think a very rigorous case for intelligent design. And that case has just gotten stronger and stronger over the ensuing now 3 decades.
Yeah. When these first couple of articles come out to lukewarm, we'll call it, reception. I mean, maybe positive in some corners, but not widely read.
They were simply not widely read. As Dembski and Behe's work was getting the lion's share of the attention at the time.
Was there a point? Sorry, go ahead. Continue.
Well, and then there was a court trial in 2004, 2005 that then brought the intelligent design idea into public view with a lot of media scrutiny. We started our Center for Science and Culture, which is the home base for the research program on intelligent design, in 1996, and we had Behe's book come out that year. Dembski 2 years later, The Design Inference with Cambridge Press. Jonathan Wells had a wonderful book called Icons of Evolution. In year 2000, we had a couple conference volumes published. One in 2020, we had a collection of anthologies in a peer-reviewed, peer-edited volume with Michigan State Press in 2003, and then in 2004, a volume published with Cambridge University Press that was peer-edited called the Debating Design. And several of us had articles in that. And then I had an article at the Smithsonian's Journal here in Washington, D.C., where we're speaking in 2004, possibly the first peer-reviewed article advancing the case for intelligent design. Might have been a few in smaller places before. but it created a furor, and sort of suddenly there was a lot of media attention. The people on the other side tried to cast us as young Earth creationists, or this was the return of the Scopes trial, or that kind of thing. So the media was uniformly negative, but we persisted, and so here we are.
What happened with that court trial you were talking about?
This was the trial in Dover, Pennsylvania, a small school district in central Pennsylvania. Advanced a policy whereby they were going to require teachers to mention to students that there was a book about intelligent design in the library when the teachers taught about Darwin's theory of evolution. On its face, a pretty tepid, kind of mild proposal.
Yeah.
They made some mistakes in the framing of it. For one of the board members who spoke on behalf of the proposal asked other board members to vote for it for the sake of the crucified one. So he expressed a religious motive for the policy on the public record, which was violated something called the Lemon Test. They also were requiring teachers to read this statement rather than giving teachers the academic freedom to discuss different aspects of the debate as it occurs in the scientific literature, which was a policy that we would have far preferred that they enact. So it was poorly framed, but also in a way shows you just how sensitive the atheistic civil libertarians are. They jumped on this, and we could see it was a nightmare. It was a train wreck of a case. Urged the school board to withdraw it, and most of us had to lay out. And only Mike Behe and Scott Minnick served as expert witnesses because their work was being specifically on irreducibly complex molecular machines was being maligned by the ACLU and in the trial, so they felt they had to defend their work. But it was a tough decision, but I decided it was not the case to get involved with, and turned out to be probably a good decision. I got a contract for signature in the cell a couple of years later that would not have happened if I had been associated with the train wreck of Dover. And after that trial, these people are just not around anymore. There's the fervor of that decade, with the new atheism,
right.
and then there was a group called the National Center for Science Education. They were deeply opposed to this. They were deeply opposed to a Texas policy that was merely allowing teachers to teach about scientific challenges and critiques of Darwinism as you find them in the peer-reviewed scientific literature. And they oppose that on the grounds that there are no weaknesses to Darwin's theory, which was laughable. So in any case,
they sound like KJV only people, just atheist versions of it.
I've heard about those people.
When you talk to KJV only people, there's no need for an update.
Yeah,
they nailed it. It's perfect. 1611.
It's a rigidity of thought. And anyway, since then, we've had numerous peer-reviewed books and articles. We're at 328 peer-reviewed articles. The one I published in 2004 was one of the first, maybe a handful. Maybe it was the first one that the scientific atheists, the Darwin-only education crowd was aware of. So they came down on the editor here at the Smithsonian in a big way for having allowed it to go through peer review. That was Richard von Sternberg. And
did he pay the price?
He did. He paid a big price for that. They went after him. He lost his access to his office, his scientific samples. They took his keys away. They transferred him to an office near the museum administrator so they could keep an eye on him. They were raising questions about whether he was a mole for the Bush administration, whether he was whether he had any degrees in science. I mean, a disinformation campaign. He had 2 earned PhDs in different subdisciplines of biology. They went after his salary was from the National Institutes of Health. They tried to get him fired over there. It took a senator intervening to save his job, and he eventually left. The climate was just so hostile. So
right.
yeah, but he's persisted. He's got a very important book in the works that I think will be a masterpiece. So,
yeah, published through you guys?
not published through us, but we are supporting his research now.
Okay.
He was a sort of agnostic about the topic when he first encountered us.
Yeah.
He was open to critiques of Darwinism, thought that the debate about intelligent design should be aired out in the scientific literature rather than in the courts or in the in op-ed pages. And he would now say he was maybe a bit naive to think that scientists would welcome the opportunity to have a genuine scientific discussion about it. At the time, the argument was intelligent design is not scientific because it's not being published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. Then it gets published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, and the argument changes to it shouldn't have been published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal because it's not scientific.
Right.
So you have this perfectly circular and exclusionary logic. It's not scientific because it hasn't been published. It shouldn't be published because it's not scientific.
You've been doing this for 30 years now?
I guess so.
Plus.
Yeah. We have our 30th anniversary of the Center for Science and Culture at Discovery Institute this summer, big celebration. But really my work, my interest in this goes back to 85, 86. So for me, I've been on a 40-year arc. Okay. And it makes this year a big year for me. Yeah. Because the culmination, my work on Origin of Life, I finally got the positive case for intelligent design published as a book in 2009. That was called Signature in the Cell. Yeah. That was the consequence or the result of the thinking I've been doing about how to whether you could make a positive case for intelligent design and then how to do that, going back to my master's and PhD work in Cambridge. Yeah. And so that was on a bit of a long arc. That was, almost 20 years after I finished my PhD.
Those are the best books when you let everything simmer.
Incubate.
Incubate. Yeah.
But then I've been thinking about combining the case for design in biology with the case for design in physics with the fine tuning and the case for a transcendent creator from the developments in astronomy and astrophysics and cosmology. And that's what I pulled together, synthesized in the book, Return of the God Hypothesis. Yeah. Many of my readers after reading Signature in the Cell and Darwin's Doubt wanted to know, well, who do you think the designing intelligence is? Because I only took the argument as far as saying there must be some kind of intelligent mind behind these biological phenomena, but did not attempt to identify that or make this into a God argument. But I do think that the evidence collectively supports a God hypothesis. And when you bring the physics and the cosmology in, it becomes the space alien designer hypothesis.
Panspermia.
Falls away.
Which Richard Dawkins said in a documentary.
I'm sure he regrets having said that.
I'm sure he does, because I will throw it in his face every chance I get.
Yeah, and Francis Crick also floated the idea in 1980, and then later said he wasn't going to write any more on the origin of life. It was too hard of a problem, and he got too much ridicule for having floated the idea that life was seeded here from outer space. There's an obvious problem with that theory as a theory of the origin of the information necessary to make life, and that it doesn't just kick the can down the road, it kicks the problem out into space without ever solving it. There's no explanation of where the information came from. Yeah. And as Jim Tour, the really accomplished Rice organic chemist, has been making clear, molecules do not want to become life. They do not arrange themselves into living systems on their own. Right. And so the problem of explaining how you get information, which is necessary to build life, from undirected molecular interactions in a prebiotic environment is not solved by the panspermia hypothesis. Yeah. It simply posits that once life arose, some intelligent agents transferred it here, transmitted it here through space, and it was seeded here. So it's not a better explanation than intelligent design. It kind of involves an element of intelligent design, but it's not a better explanation than intelligent design for the origin of the information necessary to life. But it doesn't do a good job. It doesn't explain at all the origin of the fine tuning of the laws and constants of physics and the initial conditions of the universe, that are necessary to produce life, or that would have been necessary that would have been necessary as a condition of the future evolution of any kind of life or alien life. And it certainly doesn't explain the origin of the universe. So when you look at that ensemble of evidence, the evidence that we have for the beginning of the universe, for its fine-tuning from the beginning, and the evidence we have for the origin of information long after the beginning, a theistic creator does the best overall job of explaining that. It provides the most causally adequate explanation, because the God of theism does not, unlike a deistic God, confine his or its activity to the beginning of the universe.
The God of the clockmaker.
Right, yeah. Exactly. That God is active in the creation, and the biological evidence requires that. The God of theism does precede the physical universe, or is independent of the physical universe in some sense, in a way that no alien within the universe could be. So neither the alien hypothesis nor the deistic designer hypothesis explains all three classes of evidence as well as a theistic designer does. Mm-hmm. And materialism as a worldview, because of the failure of these materialistic evolutionary theories, and I would add to that the multiverse hypothesis, all of these things have failed, doesn't explain any one of these three classes of evidence as well as a theistic designer or creator does. Yeah.
Somebody recently told me multiverse theory is somebody trying to run away from an infinite God by positing an infinite number of universes.
Well, that's right, and that's I mean, on its face, that's not an unfair thing for a materialist to conceive, right? Because they're working in a materialist framework. What they encounter is the problem of the fine tuning. You have these. You have an ensemble of physical parameters that fall within very narrow tolerances, outside of which not only life but basic chemistry would be impossible. And the collective probability of those parameters is so small, it's essentially infinitesimally small. So what the multiverse proponent does is posit the existence of, I always say, gabillions of other universes. Yeah, okay, there are some interpretations of quantum physics that might lead you to consider a multiverse, but the multiverse has been employed as the go-to atheistic explanation for the fine-tuning. But there's a big problem with that, and that is that the fine-tuning. That if you simply have these other universes out there someplace, if they're causally disconnected from our own, which is what we mean by other universes, they're separate, then whatever happens in those universes has no effect on anything that happens in this universe, including whatever process it was that set the improbable values for all the fine-tuning parameters. Right. So it doesn't really provide you a causal explanation of the improbable. The improbability of the fine-tuning, or how those improbable values were set.
You still have to come back to the first cause problem.
Well, I suppose what they do instead, which has more traction, is that they then say, well, yeah, if we just have separate universes, that's not, people have acknowledged this, that's not going to get it done. So what they do is they posit a kind of underlying universe-generating mechanism that can spit out universes so that they can portray our universe as a lucky winner among an ensemble of other universes. So there's an underlying common cause of all the universes. And so now there's a kind of a connection, not universe to universe, but at least a connection back to the common cause. And there have been two main universe-generating mechanisms proposed, one based on string theory and one based on something called inflationary cosmology. And it turns out that for those mechanisms, those scenarios to produce new universes, even in theory, those universe-generating mechanisms or systems must themselves have been finely tuned. And so you're right back to where you started, and that's the real rub for the multiverse. Even if it's true, even if it's plausible, you have to account for prior unexplained fine-tuning. And since fine-tuning is, in our experience, always a product of intelligence in the same way information is. Yeah. Think of a finely tuned French recipe, or the fine-tuning that sets a radio dial, or the fine-tuning an internal combustion engine or the relationship between hardware and software in a computer. What we mean by fine-tuning is an ensemble of improbable parameters that collectively work together to achieve some significant or functional outcome. And when we see systems that can be described that way, we say they're fine-tuned, and they are inevitably, guess what, designed by intelligent agents. So the multiverse doesn't solve if it's true, it just provides a basis for intelligent design on other grounds.
While we're talking about people who have to posit preposterous things in order to make their theory work, while I have you here, thoughts on string theory? I know you're not a subject matter expert in that field, but...
Well, no, I'm not. But I work with a couple who are,
Okay.
and I got a lot of help from Bruce Gordon, who knows string theory inside and out. He's a first-rate philosopher, a physicist who also did a master's degree in physics before he did his PhD in philosophy of physics. And there's I have a fairly significant section explaining string theory and then showing how it has been employed to provide part of, but not the whole materialistic explanation for the fine-tuning. And there's a couple of problems with it as an explanation for fine-tuning. One is that it explains only one part of the fine-tuning and not the other. You have these two cosmological models, string theory and inflationary cosmology. Inflationary cosmology gives you new universes, allegedly, but doesn't explain how you get new laws and constants of physics within those new universes. All the new universes have the same laws and constants of physics. What you can get is an explanation of new initial conditions with inflationary cosmology. String theory, for various reasons, gives you the opposite. It would, in theory at least, provide an explanation of the fine-tuning of the laws and constants of physics, but not the initial arrangement of matter in each new universe. So you have to invoke both those cosmological models to explain the same phenomena that a theistic design hypothesis explains on its own.
Yeah.
Which means then you have to posit as actually existing all the theoretical entities and postulates that are part of those two cosmological models. So
You lost me on that sentence.
Okay.
Can you try again for
All
a
right.
10th grade education?
yeah, so each one of those speculative cosmological models or physically speculative models posits the existence of things that don't exist unless those models are true.
Okay.
So in inflationary cosmology, there's something called an inflaton field. Okay, you have to posit this thing that causes the universe to expand very rapidly and then expand less rapidly after a certain period of time. You have to, in string theory, posit the existence of strings, little filaments, as the fundamental basis of all matter.
Or 14 different dimensions.
Yeah,
that
all the
are
dimensions of
unobservable.
space-time,
Yeah.
depending on which model. And so what I've done in Return of the God hypothesis is count up all the different theoretical entities you have to posit in those two different models of ultimate reality or cosmology in order to explain the fine-tuning as well as the single postulate of a prior intelligent mind. And Bruce Gordon wrote an article once called Believing 8 Impossible Things Before Breakfast, or 6 or 10 or whatever. And I think we came up with something like at least 10 separate theoretical postulates are necessary to provide the same explanatory power as you get from the single postulate of a theistic designer. So there's a kind of gross violation of Occam's razor, where Occam's principle was don't needlessly multiply theoretical entities when you're trying to explain something. The best explanation, all other things being equal, posits the fewer theoretical entities, so that your theory is simple in that sense of not having unnecessary theoretical postulates or pure ad hoc elements in your hypothesis.
Yeah. Okay. That was a fun little sidebar.
Yeah.
You've been doing this for 40 years. Do you feel like intelligent design is gaining any kind of real traction?
Oh my goodness, yes.
Okay, I'm glad to see the enthusiasm.
Well, it's obvious. If my paper 20 years ago was one of the first 2, 3, or 4 peer-reviewed articles, we have a graph showing the exponential rise in publishing in peer-reviewed scientific journals supporting the theory of intelligent design. Our research director gave me a report last week. We're at 328 articles.
And is that just through the Discovery Institute, or is it even beyond you guys?
There's in mainstream journals. There are 2 peer-reviewed journals that are devoted to looking at one. It takes articles about the debate over intelligent design and Darwinism, and the other is a journal that's peer-reviewed that is devoted to developing the theory of intelligent design. So some of the articles in some of those journals are part of that count, but we've had articles in numerous frontline journals in different fields. One in Gene recently establishing that the similarity of the chimp and human proteome is very the differences in the chimp and human proteome are quite dramatic. You always hear this stat that
98%
98% similarity in the genes, but the things that genes, and that number is inflated. That's dropping all the time. But the proteome, the things that the genes make, the proteins, are dramatically different, between 45 and 65% similarity, not 98, 95, 90, 85. And that just shows that the information processing systems in the 2 organisms are completely different, which finally accounts for all the anatomical and behavioral differences. Right. When it was the anatomical and behavioral differences were never accounted for by 2% of the DNA. So there was something missing in that whole thing we've heard a million times. That's just one example.
Sure.
But the journal Gene is frontline. Amazing new paper that's come out with a 7-author team, some biologists, some engineers, looking at the information, the way in which it's looking at intercellular communication.
Yeah.
And careful analysis of that shows that it's based on the same design logic that underwrites the internet. So we're finding things we've got molecular machines, we've got the basic complex information storage and transmission and processing system inside the cell. Actually, there's actually 2 information processing systems inside the cell. One that produces the proteins and protein machines, the other that's responsible for what's called DNA replication. So it's just kind of awesome.
Yeah.
But and in those systems, we see all kinds of known design patterns from computer science. A design pattern is an established method of storing and transmitting information in a digital environment, and we're finding those same kinds of design patterns. Automated error correction, for example, hierarchical filing and organization of information, another example.
Wow.
And so we're finding technologies, especially informational technologies, that are eerily reminiscent of our own high-tech digital computing and the technologies in that realm.
Now, when I asked you if
lots of papers, developing,
yes,
and lots of books. We've published over 300 books in our 30-year history. That is our associated research fellows at Discovery Institute. Not all of them are scientific. Probably half, roughly. I'd have to look. Many are exploring other facets of the debate, the history, the philosophy, the theological implications. But we're publishing books and articles, and we're attracting a huge number of talented young people into our summer programs. We have a database of over 2,500 ID-friendly scientists. So, when we started in the 90s.
You said 2,500.
Yeah, in the 90s, we were Dembski and Meyer and Nelson and
you don't need a database for that.
And
just write it down on a napkin.
We were, half dozen or so. Mostly young, recently minted PhDs, a couple older scientists, and so the movement and the research network has grown exponentially, as has the output of the productivity. Are
you finding any more, I guess we'll say, acceptance of this view on university campuses or even in public schools at the high
Yeah, that's where
schools?
these scientists are coming from that are in our database,
Right.
or who are publishing the books and the articles. We also have summer programs that are now mature enough that we're producing where previous graduates of those programs have gone on to get faculty positions in their own right, and more than a handful have gone on to get tenure, and in some cases labs in which they're now supervising PhD students of their own. And that's a picture of academic change. That's how long-term change takes place. Is you start to shift the worldview framework of an institution, where it's at least legitimate to raise these questions, whereas it's, as my colleague David Klinghoffer likes to say, we got canceled before getting canceled was cool. And but they're not canceling us so much anymore, and younger people are getting into good positions. So
there's a German word, I don't remember it, and if I did, I wouldn't be able to pronounce it. But it basically speaks to when an artist is working on something, they know they have something special, even in its seed form. Did you know that at the time?
Yes. Yeah. I went back and talked to my undergraduate mentor, a philosophy professor, and he said, if this is right, this DNA, call it the DNA to design argument.
Yeah.
He said, if this is right, he said, this is the most significant thing to happen in philosophy in 300 years, because what it's showing is that the design argument, which was essentially rejected starting in the late Enlightenment period, and then especially after Darwin's work,
right,
is back on the table. And so, yeah, I think this is. I did an interview yesterday with someone in the science press who was kind of trying to be nice, but was reflexively skeptical. And he said, didn't you ever worry that your work on this would cross over from science into theology? And I finally said, no, why would that be a worry? If the scientific evidence actually points to the reality of a transcendent creator, wouldn't that be the most exciting thing that you could possibly discover?
Yeah.
I wasn't convinced of that initially, but I was certainly investigating the possibility. That was part of what made it interesting.
Yeah.
And every investigation of origins raises these fundamental metaphysical questions. Every worldview questions.
Yeah.
Every worldview has to answer the what James Meyer and other worldview scholars
the universe next door
yeah,
guy.
Right,
yeah,
exactly. What is the thing or the entity or the process from which everything else comes?
Mm-hmm.
Meyer calls it the prime reality question. Mainstream philosophers call it the question of ontology, metaphysics. What is the thing that's the ground of all being from which everything else comes? And in the West, there have been two basic possibilities. Either it's some kind of pre-existing matter and energy and material processes issuing from that, or it's a pre-existing mind, a creative intelligence.
Yeah.
In the East, you have the third option of a God who is impersonal and not a conscious agent, the impersonal oneness of all things.
Yeah.
Those are your three basic metaphysical options.
Yeah.
Either you can even divide up the intellectual terrain into three categories with two questions. Does God exist? Yes or no. If you say yes, you're a theist with a small t. If you say no, you're a materialist of some kind. If you then ask about, well, what kind of God? The second question, okay, if God exists, what kind of God is it? Is it a personal God or an impersonal God? If you say yes, you're a theist with a big T. If you say no, you're a theist with a small. You're not a theist. You're a pantheist with a. Okay. Now there's variations on those themes, but the basic worldview questions are pretty straightforward, and there's a limited number of options about how you can answer them. So. And the point is that origins questions necessarily raise those deeper questions about the prime reality. What is the thing? If you have a materialistic account of the origin of the universe and the origin of life and the origin of human life, you're going to be inclined toward a materialistic worldview. And if you think that instead there is evidence of a designing intelligence, then you're going to be either a theist or a deist, or maybe a panspermiast. I don't know, but you can adjudicate those differences as well, and that's what I do in the
Return of
the God hypothesis. I evaluate each of those metaphysical hypotheses. I evaluate the competing explanatory power of each of those metaphysical hypotheses to show that actually there's a strong case for theism over and against the others.
When I saw that you had released that book, I was a little surprised because it felt like, and brother, feel free to jump in and correct me if I'm wrong here. It felt like the ethos of the Discovery Institute world is we may be evangelicals, we may not be evangelicals, but we're not trying to posit an evangelical claim. We're trying to posit a strictly scientific and philosophical claim. And we don't want people to kind of point at us and say, oh, I see what you're doing. Christians are trying to sneak creationism in the back door.
I find that the argument from illicit motivations that's come at us incredibly tiresome.
Yeah.
And it was never any purpose of mine to conceal, or anyone else at the Discovery Institute to conceal the worldview, interest, or motivations that any of us may have had.
Yeah.
First of all, we're not an evangelical organization.
Right.
We have Jewish fellows and Catholic fellows and people who are who are inclined towards Christian orthodoxy in the Christian sense. We have different stripes of Jewish scholars, those that are theistic but not religious, those that are somewhat agnostic but intrigued with the design case, some that are orthodox and some that are conservadox. So and we allow our different scholars and scientists to speak about ultimate concerns in any frame or way they want to. What binds us together is a deep dissatisfaction with materialism as a philosophy, and the sense that ultimately we live in a mind over matter universe where mind or creativity, whether it be God's or human creativity, is more fundamental than matter alone. But that means, I'm like any other of our fellows, free to speak metaphysically where the evidence suggests or where people want to know.
Yeah.
And this was always part of my research program. I thought that the case for design, if it could be made, was then was a prelude to a case for theistic design. And so
is there a next stage, a case to be made for?
Well, I'm
Christ?
I'm a Christian. Yeah, I'm teaching a course this summer that I have an apologetics course that I've taught at the college level for 15 years, earlier in my career, but now I'm teaching it in Cambridge this summer, and it's a full-orbed Christian apologetics course that addresses three big questions: does God exist? Is the Bible reliable? And who is Jesus Christ? So that's just who I am. The Discovery Institute in our program, the Center for Science and Culture, is committed to challenging scientific materialism and advancing a broadly theistic interpretation of the natural sciences. And that's why we have a diversity of religious perspectives and expressions within our network of fellows and scholars.
Yeah.
But that means each of us also has the freedom to speak within our own framework or to advance our own particular view. Yeah. And that's the way we do it. So for a while there was this kind of dual argument where you were damned if you did and damned if you didn't, where people, if you made a theistic argument from the evidence for design, people would say you were overstating a case.
Yeah.
Because from biology, you can get to a designing intelligence of some unspecified kind, but it's at least a logical possibility that the intelligence is responsible for the informational properties of life resides within the cosmos, in which case you might opt for something like panspermia. I was never convinced of that, but it was at least a logical possibility. So I didn't make the God case until I brought the cosmology and the physics in, because I think that very decisively eliminates panspermia as having the same degree of explanatory power as a theistic design hypothesis.
Can we talk a little bit about evolution?
Sure.
Outside of the information technology argument, which you've argued very well, and that's not the way you say it, but what do you think is the next biggest problem with Darwinian macroevolution.
How long do you have?
A lot of time. This is room for nuance, brother.
Well, the first thing to say is something a little provocative, but neo-Darwinism is dead.
It doesn't feel dead.
It doesn't feel dead because it's still taught in public schools, but it feels dead in our world. In 2016, there was a conference at the Royal Society, arguably the most august scientific body in the world, venerable, going back to the time of Newton and Boyle.
Okay.
And it was convened. The meeting was convened by leading evolutionary biologists who had been saying, and who were investigating at this conference, the need for a new theory of evolution. There is a need for a new theory of evolution. That the mutation selection mechanism lacks the creative power to explain large-scale morphological innovation in the history of life. It does a fine job of explaining small-scale.
Why the finch's beak gets longer,
shorter.
Right? But not how we went from a single-cell organism to a chimp to a human.
Or just how do you get the first animal forms?
Okay.
How do you explain the first mammals in the Eocene? You know, there's the Gunter Beckley of blessed memory, one of our dear colleagues who was lost a year ago in an automobile accident. It was a leading German paleontologist. After I wrote Darwin's Doubt, which was about one of the major fossil explosions in the history of life, which was the Cambrian explosion,
right,
documenting the discontinuous and abrupt origin of the major animal body plans in the history of life, we wrote another article about I think the count was 17 other major fossil explosions. You know, the first turtles, the first sea reptiles, the first birds, the first flowering plants, the first mammals, et cetera. You just go on and on. And so there's this huge pattern of discontinuity in the fossil record. And that's a problem for not only Darwinism, but the theory of universal common descent, which might be incorporated into other theories of evolution.
Sure.
But the most fundamental problems aren't with the historical pattern of plant and animal appearance in the history of life, but it's rather with the underlying the presumed process. And in Darwin's Doubt, I said there were two big mysteries. One was the mystery of the missing fossils,
which Darwin himself admitted to.
And that was the source of the title. And then, but now the deeper question is the unsolved problem of how do you build an animal? Okay, and if we look at it, so there's the question of the origin of information, which is it's not just a problem. Excuse me, it's not just a problem for chemical evolutionary theory. It's also a problem for biological evolutionary theory, for Darwin's theory. The problem doesn't go away just because you have a living cell that can now start to self-replicate. And here's the problem. If we know that if you need to build something in living system, fundamental, you need to build, say, a new protein or a new protein structure.
Right.
Probably the smallest unit of biological innovation.
Let me guess. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, proteins are they're the toolboxes. They're the tools of the cell. They copy information.
Yeah.
They build the structural parts for molecular machines. They are often, some classes of proteins are enzyme catalysts that catalyze reactions at super fast rates that would have not faster than would have otherwise occurred, and they're absolutely crucial to almost all of our metabolic processes. So they do all these jobs, and you have to have proteins to live. And how do proteins get built? They get built by the instructions on the DNA molecule. But since we've realized that DNA contains information in a digital or alphabetic form, again, Bill Gates, DNA is like a software program. Dawkins is like a machine code. Leroy Hood, leading biotech guy, says DNA is just digital code.
Yeah.
Well, we know something about the way digital code works in our own computer environment. If you start changing the zeros and ones that code for something, for a program or app or operating system, as you accumulate those changes, you're going to very quickly degrade what you have long before you will have made enough changes to build something new and functional.
Right.
Well, there's experimental evidence that shows the exact same thing is true of DNA. You can accumulate if you start randomly changing the A's, C's, G's, and T's in a section of a gene for building a protein, you can change a few of those letters randomly, and we'll have a reasonable chance of finding an alternative version of the protein that may even perform a different function, but within the same structure of what's called the protein fold that enables the three-dimensional structure of the protein itself. As you accumulate more changes and you get past sometimes 3, sometimes 5, maybe you might get to 7, or big stretch, maybe 10% sequence difference in the number of changes, but no examples beyond that. I think no examples beyond 5 to 7%. The structure of that protein fold denatures. It unravels, and you get...
and the fold is everything.
The fold is everything. It's a precondition of all function.
Yeah.
So you get...
this protein does this because it's
got a folded structure, and you can have slight variations within the structure of the fold performing slightly different functions. But if you destroy the thermodynamic stability of the fold, which you do if you accumulate, 3, 5, 7% of the fold, then no function is possible. And so no future evolution of that structure is possible. There's no function to select. Mm-hmm. But we know empirically that different folds have on average about a 65% sequence difference. So again, if you start randomly changing things, you will destroy the functional basis of what you have long before you will have changed it enough to establish a basis for entirely new types of function.
And that's just talking about proteins, which are not themselves alive.
No.
That doesn't even get us to the question of entities, which are proteins on top of proteins.
Now this is a lights out problem for neo-Darwinism. Yeah. But there are other analogous problems. Okay. There's something called developmental gene regulatory networks. I have a picture of one of them in Return to the God Hypothesis and also in the Darwin's Doubt. Okay. So a developmental gene regulatory network is a network of genes, genetic information, as many sections of genetic information that code for gene products. That would include proteins, but also regulatory RNAs. These gene products, in turn, during the development of an animal, so it's after you have a fertilized egg and you have one cell that becomes 2 cells that becomes 4, 8, 16. You get that
mitosis.
Animal development. Okay. And you have a geometric expansion in the number of cells. Okay. As that animal is developing, certain genes are turned on to produce specific proteins to service specific types of cells. So you got bone cells in one place and nerve cells in another, blood cells someplace else, etc. And this is all a beautifully choreographed process.
Yeah.
And so as the scientists have mapped how the genes are, when they are turned on, what they produce, what those gene products do to further regulate the expression of other genetic information, turning it on or turning it off at different times, and they map those functional relationships, what has come back to them is something that looks like an integrated circuit from electrical engineering. But instead of the circuit controlling a flow of electricity, it's essentially controlling a flow of information. But what they've learned, and this is where the rub comes in for all theories of evolution, of macroevolution. The scientists that studied this, Eric Davidson in particular out at Caltech, no friend of intelligent design or creationism, by the way, what he showed is that if you perturb the core elements of these gene regulatory networks, the animal development will just shut down. That these are subject to very small changes in the interrelationship of the parts of the regulatory network, or or other forms of change, like shutting down a particular gene, for example. Will shut down the regulatory network and terminate the process of animal development long before you get to the point of the full development of the body plan.
Yeah.
So you can't change these things much without destroying the process of animal development and therefore terminating any possibility of future evolution from that animal form. Okay, big problem. Now, suppose you have animal body plan A that's produced by developmental gene regulatory network A, and you want to change body plan A into body plan B, have a major macroevolutionary change. Mm-hmm. Well, what do you need? You're going to need a new developmental gene regulatory network, one that's quite different than the one you have, because you got to build something that's quite different than the animal you have.
Right.
And so it creates a kind of A to B problem. If you can't change the body plan. The one thing we know empirically is you cannot alter these developmental gene regulatory networks to any significant degree without shutting down the development of the animal and therefore any possibility of future evolutionary change. So this imposes a huge impediment to any significant macroevolutionary change. You can't get from body plan A to body plan B without getting a new developmental gene regulatory network, which means you got to change developmental gene regulatory network A, which is the very thing we know empirically you cannot do. So that's a problem with all forms of macroevolutionary theory, not just neo-Darwinism, and it's fundamentally unsolved. Eric Davidson said that neo-Darwinism was a catastrophic error in thinking because it didn't address this problem. But none of the newer models of evolutionary theory have either, because they run up against this fundamental aspect of the fundamental element of all theories of evolution is the ability to change things that you have.
What is your best counter explanatory theory? So like you look at the fossil problem, you look at this problem, you look at that problem. A lot of your work is going like, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work. Yeah. Have you formulated?
Yeah, I addressed in Darwin's Doubt 8 different post-neo-Darwinian theories of evolution. The one I like best is what's called natural genetic engineering. And this is work by James Shapiro at the University of Chicago. He was one of the conveners of the 2016 Royal Society Conference. And Shapiro has done some great work showing that the mutations that many of the mutations that have been studied in living organisms are not random at all, that they're under a kind of what he calls algorithmic control, where the organism receives some sort of environmental signal or stressor that triggers a pre-programmed adaptive response that causes some genes to be turned on and others to be turned off. And so you have this...
Sounds like a software code.
Well, exactly. It's a tightly integrated information processing system. It's a regulatory system. It's a control system.
Yeah.
And so,
which would shoot the gap in a lot of nature nurture questions.
Well, it also raises questions about how much of observable evolution is really Darwinian.
What do you mean by that?
Well, Darwin posed that natural selection was acting on random variations, and then neo-Darwinists proposed that natural selection was acting on random variations and random mutations. And Shapiro is showing that, you get these changes, you get these adaptive changes, but they're pre-programmed.
Yeah,
they're not at all random. And so the question is, where does the pre-programming come from? And that's something that Shapiro doesn't really address or answer.
Right.
And so it does suggest that there's certainly evolutionary change possible, but it's change that's constrained and limited by the algorithmic if-then subroutines that are part of the cellular or animal architecture.
Let me put on my I'm listening to the Room for Nuance hat.
It also suggests, just to finish, that there's a locus of design that Shapiro doesn't really talk about, which is the pre-programmed adaptive capacity. The informational architecture and software that makes those adaptive changes possible is something that's pre-programmed, and that's where we would see evidence of design.
Is that demonstrable? Can that be demonstrated, these pre-programmed things?
Yeah, I think Shapiro has demonstrated that there is a kind of pre-programming at work. Yeah.
All right. It seems like it should be more revolutionary than
Well, it's part of the third way, that they call it the third way evolutionists, that are rejecting neo-Darwinism. Dennis Noble from Oxford University is another important figure in that movement. So there's some very prominent scientists talking about this stuff. But our ID critique is that they don't go far enough and talk about the origin of, in Shapiro's case, the pre-programming that's responsible for these non-Darwinian phenomena.
Right. And to be fair to him, maybe he would say, that's not really my field of research. I'm not trying to offer explanatory power. I'm just observing this is.
Describing what goes on.
Yeah.
In fact, I can report a conversation that one of my colleagues had with him in which that was exactly what he said.
Yeah.
Paul Nelson, a colleague, talked with him about this after they'd been at presented at a conference together along with Mike Behe.
Yeah.
And Shapiro just said to Paul, apparently I'm getting this secondhand, but this is Paul's account, was that he said that Shapiro said to him, "I can't make any sense of this intelligent design concept you guys have. What are you talking about?" And Paul mirrored back to him, echoed his own description of these non-random mutations being the product of this pre-programmed adaptive capacity. And Shapiro says, "Yeah, that's right. It's not Darwinian at all." And then apparently, then Paul said, "Well," he said, and then he asked him, "Well, where does the pre-programming come from?" And apparently, what Shapiro said was, "I hardly ever think about that." So it's kind of not his issue. Right? Fair enough.
It will be soon enough. Okay, I'm gonna put my I'm the listener on Room for Nuance, or I'm watching this right now. I'm probably, as a conservative evangelical Christian who doesn't believe in Darwinian macroevolution, I might not even have those categories. I'm just like, evolution bad. Okay. I would probably be really excited to hear you say, here are the 15 problems I have with evolution. And then I might be surprised to hear you say, but here is an evolutionary process that I could get on board with. Is there a sense in which there could be an evolutionary process that is in accord with the clear teachings of Scripture as far as creation? Is that a muddy question, or should I try again?
That's a clear question.
Okay.
I would say that pretty much all the processes of adaptation that we've known about, for the biologists have known about for centuries, are forms of evolution. The term evolution, the problem with it is that people get hung up on the different meanings. You can equivocate. So small-scale variation or adaptation is a type of evolution. It's often called microevolution. Okay, so I think that that's observable.
Yeah, and
it's it attests to the pre-programming that Shapiro has mapped out. So that's kind of a cool evidence of design at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So universal common descent, that's the second meaning of evolution, the idea that things have morphed and changed from a single-celled organism all the way to everything that we have today, and that the change has been continuous and gradual. I think you could reconcile that with a meaningful form of theism and maybe even a particular reading of the biblical text. I think I'm deeply skeptical of the second meaning of evolution on empirical and scientific grounds. I see profound discontinuity in the fossil record. I see profound discontinuity now in the genomic record or hierarchy. The phylogenetic hierarchy, or landscape rather, of all the different forms of life is now repeatedly showing what are called orphan genes, genes that have no sequence similarity to any other known genes. They really shouldn't exist in a Darwinian scheme of things. Every gene should have some reasonably close relationship with some other gene as far as the sequential arrangement of the information-bearing bases. And so orphan genes are attesting now to a discontinuous phylogenetic landscape of all the creatures. So I have scientific reasons for being skeptical, but especially scientific reasons. But I think on its face, it's a little hard to square with the idea of God making different kinds of things that and they reproduce after their own kind.
Right.
That just doesn't. There's ways you could sort of try to harmonize that. but it especially doesn't fit with the idea, the sort of the idea of unguided, undirected evolution. Number 3, the idea of an unguided, undirected evolutionary process as being the causal source of new forms of life in us, I think is both is contradicted by the evidence, and also I think directly contradicted by the Genesis account in Scripture.
What are your thoughts on what feels now almost dead, but maybe in decades past, the strong push for theistic evolution and the Logos Forum and all that stuff?
We wrote a book. We did a big book, 1,000-page anthology called Theistic Evolution.
With Wayne Grudem?
Wayne Grudem was one of the theological authors. J.P. Moreland, one of the philosophical authors. Chris Shaw, a British scientist, was one of the scientific authors. And Ann Gager was one of the, not authors. We had it was such a big book. I think we had an editorial team of 5.
Yeah. This person oversees this.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So the title was Theistic Evolution: A Scientific, Philosophical, and Theological Critique.
Yeah.
And I wrote the introduction and expressed skepticism on the basis of all 3 of those categories of thinking. I think it's neo-Darwinism in particular is scientifically moribund. It's a dead theory.
Yeah.
And
actually, sorry, can I forgot to ask you this earlier. If it's dead, how long do you think it will take for us to smell the rotting corpse?
Yeah. Well, let's I guess we can't say it's dead if there's still people who want to say they believe in it, right?
Right.
Yeah, but it's
taught at every high school in the United States of America.
It's extremely implausible now for scientific reasons that are getting reported in peer-reviewed scientific journals. At that 16 conference, an Austrian evolutionary biologist kicked off the discussion with a 5-point critique of the explanatory deficits of neo-Darwinism.
Yeah.
And they're legion. They're not just 5. But anyway,
I guess let me ask it this way, brother. Do you think there's going to be a place in the United States, we'll just start here, where in the next 50 years or 100 years or 150 years, when kids go to school, they'll learn a different explanation?
I should certainly hope so. I mean, I can't predict the future of educational policy.
Sorry to ask you to prognosticate.
Well, no, yeah, but the thing is, the direction that things are going scientifically, there are very few public defenders of Darwinian evolution to start with.
It feels like that can't be true. It feels like I hear it everywhere and see it everywhere.
I'm talking about people that defend the theory because they purport to know something about it, not people who propagate it because they're told that the people who know something have this all sewn up.
Yeah.
Okay. So people are basing their propagation of the theory or their teaching of the theory based on an alleged consensus that no longer exists.
Yeah.
Ken Miller has retired. Eugenie Scott has retired. Michael Shermer is not a biologist. You don't have...
Were these kind of like the big
These were the big defenders. And Richard Dawkins is 82, and he's overplayed his hand.
Yeah.
I call them Darwin's public defenders, right? And so you still have evolutionary biology textbooks. You still have people on autopilot in mainstream universities teaching this stuff. But the problems, Stephen Jay Gould in 1980 said that neo-Darwinism is dead except as textbook orthodoxy. Okay? So, all right, we're having a percolation problem.
Yeah.
But you get someone on to explain how you can get a new body plan given that developmental gene regulatory networks can't be altered. And then you'll have a credible evolutionary theory.
Yeah.
But you have these times of really fundamental problems that are not going away and haven't gone away and have been around now for, in some cases decades, in some cases, So anyway,
will there have to be a new golden standard before that one before Darwinism kind of dies out?
There's going to be a generational shift. Thomas Kuhn, who wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolution, and Emir Lakatos, another philosopher and historian of science who mapped, well, his way of talking about it was how do research programs change?
Okay.
And Kuhn's big insight was you get scientific revolutions occur one funeral at a time. As an older generation dies out, and a younger generation that's interested in a new idea or has been seized with a better explanation of accumulating anomalies, and that's what we have with neo-Darwinism, accumulating anomalies. Then things start to shift. So there's a sociological dimension to this, which you're asking about. Yeah. And what I'm seeing is tremendous enthusiasm among young people who want to study life from a different in a different framework.
Yeah,
it's happening already, irrespective of whether or not people acknowledge it. We have a field in biology called systems biology.
That's the first stutter you've had in 2 hours, brother. I'll forgive you this
one. I'm getting a little tired. Yeah. Systems biology is essentially studying biology from the standpoint of systems engineering. And so it's implicitly ID. It's implicitly, it imports design concepts into the analysis of biological systems.
Because engineering assumes an engineer.
Well,
or assumes intelligence.
Well, more to the point, you can't describe the biological systems accurately without using engineering concepts. Okay, and then you have to ask, well, why is that the case?
Yeah.
Does that also imply that there was a master engineer behind all this?
Yeah.
It seems to be the most intuitively plausible inference to draw. Yeah.
And you're saying that this is a field that's developing not
within mainstream biology.
Mainstream biology.
Yeah, that's right. And that's what we have all these, engineers working with biologists, because the engineers are very good at mapping and recognizing design systems or design patterns that we know from our own high-tech digital or engineering world, whether it be double E or mechanical engineering or computer engineering.
Yeah. Do you guys at the Discovery Institute, what is your role in helping raise up the next generation of these scholars?
We do three things, Sean. We support, incubate, publish, and disseminate scientific research.
Okay.
And also research that would be in adjacent fields like the history and the philosophy of science, or in the social sciences or mathematics. We do educational outreach, and we have two different educational programs. Actually three. Maybe four. We have ID education days for mainly high school students that we do around the country. We have a summer program for scientists who are juniors and seniors in college and post graduates in master's, PhD programs, and even postdocs, students that are on a trajectory into who are pursuing a scientific career. Yeah. And then we have a Cambridge program that addresses a lot of these scientific issues, but also looks at broader apologetic concerns. And then we have, and then we're creating courses for a number of universities that they are using in online education. So we're very concerned to help influence the thinking of
the next generation
thought leaders, especially those in the sciences, but also in adjacent fields.
Are you finding any of this stuff making it into public school curriculum?
Yeah, I think that there's 10 or 11 states that have academic freedom bills that allow teachers to teach scientific problems and weaknesses with Darwinian theory. We haven't, since the Dover debacle, pushed anything like a curriculum innovation that would require them or encourage the teaching of intelligent design. But some of the academic freedom bills are probably written in ways that allow for open discussion of competing hypotheses, including, if the students initiated at least, the idea of intelligent design. So there's a little bit of loosening up there, of liberalization. There's also charter schools, charter schools and some public schools have taken our textbook, Explore Evolution, the arguments for and against neo-Darwinism. So there's more of an open evaluation of the theory. And then there's a lot of stuff going on at the university level.
Right. Have you thought about developing a high school curriculum for private Christian schools that they can use?
Oh, there's already such a thing.
Oh, you guys
There's
have
a
that?
Pro ID curriculum, and we have a book, Exploring Intelligent Design, or Discovering Intelligent Design, and Explore Evolution. So those two books are making a really nice complement. And yeah, so people at classical Christian academies are using these things. Other Christian high schools and middle schools. So we have a lot to offer. We have tons of online videos, and we have a long story short cartoon series. It's really well done. It's a great way to learn molecular biology.
Yeah.
We've got a series called Science Uprising that's online. These are a series documentary shorts. There's one on Your Designed Human Body, one featuring Michael Behe about this. I forgot the title. It's about the intricacy of the cell.
Yeah.
So lots of online content that can be used to supplement high school and biology classes.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the thing that we first started talking about is we have a 95-minute documentary, theatrical release documentary, going into U.S. theaters April 30th, all around the country. And it will be, after its theatrical run, it will also go out on digital platforms.
Nice.
And
I hope you're making it free on YouTube.
Well, no, I don't think we will. It'll be probably for sale on the digital platforms, but probably very inexpensively. But the other thing is, people really need to get out and see this in the theaters. It's made for the big screen. Okay. There are 400 visual effects. There's gorgeous cinematography. There's animations that take you inside the world of the cell and allow you to see the little tiny nano machines, the rotary engines, the sliding clamps, the robotic walking motor proteins, the rotary engines that the turbines. It's just a fascinating world.
So I live in Decatur, Alabama. What are the odds that I'm going to be able to see that in a theater?
All you have to do is send us the theater near you, and we'll send it on to the producers and the distributors.
Really?
So, yeah.
Oh, I'm going to put in a request. I'll take everybody in my church.
Yeah. Well, that's what a lot of people are doing. Is they're buying out theaters, buying blocks of tickets, and
wow.
And it's from my point of view, it's something that will really give young people, high school and college students, a little spring in their step. If they're believers, if they believe in God, they'll I think there's a lot of cultural insecurity among people who do believe in God.
Yeah.
And a lot of that cultural insecurity is derivative of intellectual insecurity. We're not sure how to defend our message, whether it's really true, whether it's true in anything other than a subjective way that makes me feel good, as opposed to there being an evidential or rational basis for it. And this film will provide that. And it will also, therefore, inoculate students against the scientific atheism that very commonly gets rammed down their throats when they get to freshman and college science courses or just the general university environment. So
yeah. Okay, I'm excited. Tell us one more time what it's called.
It's called The Story of Everything.
The Story of Everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're talking, I don't know when this will air, but you and I are talking on April 8th today.
Yeah.
And there was an op-ed published today at foxnews.com about the Artemis 2 Artemis 2 voyage, and the consistent impression that astronauts have when they get into space not so much an impression, almost an epiphany. They look at that beautiful blue planet back through the windows of their capsules, and then they see against the backdrop, of this blackness of deep space, knowing, as far as we know, there are no other life-friendly planets in the entire universe. There's whole arguments about that. We could get into that, but the number of conditions that have to be just right to make planet Earth, and the number of conditions at a cosmic level that have to be just right. The view of planet Earth has often triggered this sort of awareness that there must be a mind, a guiding hand behind it. There's a famous passage in the General Scholium to the Principia, the theological epilogue to Newton's greatest work of science, of physics, on universal gravitation, where he is just reflecting on the delicate balance of all the planets that allow us to have a stable solar system. And he says this most beautiful system of sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being, capital B. And I think many of the astronauts that have gone into space, if you think of the the Apollo 8 astronauts who read the Genesis account back to Earth on Christmas Day, 1968, or the current head of NASA, Jared Isaacman, who has said that his time in space convinced him that, quote, the heavens declare the glory of God, or one of the astronauts who's been reflecting on his experience on the current voyage, and another of the astronauts wrote down the verse, the heavens declare the glory of God, to give to Pat Forrester, who was one of the senior astronauts who's had a role in kind of mentoring the crew,
Yeah.
So there is this sort of spiritual sense that people have when they see our beautiful blue planet from space. And so I wrote an op-ed about that today and asked the question, who's right, the religiously inclined astronauts or the scientific atheists? And I said, actually, the scientific evidence of the last 100 years supports the religiously inclined astronauts. We have and that's the story of the film, the story of everything, is the discovery that the universe had a beginning. There was a creation event that it's been finely tuned, suggesting that there must be a transcendent fine tuner, and that we've got this exquisite realm of digital technology inside the cell, suggesting a master programmer for life.
Let's switch gears real quick. May I ask how old you are?
68. Well, not quite. In 2 weeks, I'll be 68, yeah.
I'm shocked. I thought you were going to say 56. Okay, you're 68. Wow. Okay, so there's a whole generation of men in the church world that I inhabit, that I love to death, and they're going away. The R.C. Sproul's, the MacArthurs, Mark Dever, my hero, he's 65. So I guess,
he's a little younger than
he's a little younger,
not much.
Yes,
and we don't want to consign Mark Dever to retirement.
I'm thinking,
too soon.
Not too soon.
He's got a lot to go. Yeah,
Piper's in his 80s, but it has me thinking, especially as I watched a conference Q&A panel and I looked at the dais and I was like, okay, when they're gone, who's the next generation? As you're getting up there, I'm not consigning you to early retirement either, brother. I think you're going to be useful for as long as the Lord has you here. But as you are getting up in age, who's going to be the next Stephen C. Meyer? Is there anyone that you're thinking about, like, I really think this person or this group of people or this organization can really...
Well, none of us are gifted just like another person. This is one of the great things about the design concept, is that not only does it apply to the universe and to life in general, I think each of us can begin to think about our unique abilities and way that we've been designed, and as we try to discern what our life's work or calling or mission should be. And so there's a whole generation of intellectual and administrative and other types of and communicative leaders coming up behind me and Bill Dembski and Paul Nelson and Jonathan Wells, alas, passed away a year ago. But there's a Michael Behe. There's a bunch of us in our 60s, and we're seeing people coming up in their in
20s, 30s, 40s.
Well, yeah, but some really fine leaders in the late 40s, early 50s.
Okay.
That kind of, and then wonderful young scientists that are doing research, taking the intelligent design concept and using it to generate testable research questions and generate research projects and making discoveries that go well beyond the initial arguments for intelligent design. Like this paper I told you about with the fascinating, documenting the fascinating discovery that the internet uses the same type of design logic as intercellular communication.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that you're really excited about that you want to talk about or promote before we get into the rapid fire questions?
Okay. Oh, well, there's more.
These are meant to be fun.
Okay, fun. So, and you limit me with my long answers. Well, I think the big thing is, I'm here in D.C. I'm crisscrossing the country right now talking about this film. I'm really excited about it, and it's a fantastic cinematic experience, as one reviewer put it. But it also combines three things. It combines great storytelling with fantastic visuals and a really persuasive argument. an argument about a really fundamental question, which is what is the thing or the entity or the process from which everything else comes?
Yeah.
That fundamental worldview question that every worldview has to answer. So it's a film that will help people formulate their fundamental worldview, and it's also a film that believers in God who may be used to religious filmmaking that's a bit embarrassing sometimes because the production values aren't that high.
Yeah.
I think people are going to find that this is a film they can take their non-believing neighbors to and not have any with no fear of embarrassment. In fact, I think what it will inspire some really great conversations. So,
praise God. That's really cool, man. Also, you've done Ben Shapiro, Joe Rogan. I'm sorry that you had to condescend down to us on the Room for Nuance podcast. I hope it was just as stimulating for you.
You asked great questions. It's good discussion.
It's easy to interview really smart people. I just go, oh, well, tell me more, Okay, rapid fire questions. These are supposed to be fun, but also I'm going to be stern. I'm going to hold your feet to the fire, okay?
Tiny, quite short little
well,
answers.
more just like, for example, this first question is tea or coffee.
Okay.
And you can't say both.
Oh, I don't like
You see what I'm saying?
I don't like coffee. I don't drink it at all.
Okay.
I'm from Seattle. It's almost sacrilege.
Yeah.
I didn't drink tea until I got to Britain, but the British ladies will not take no for an answer. So
Yeah.
I learned to take tea with milk and sugar, and I, as much as possible, follow the British convention of MIF, milk in first.
Oh, okay. Do you live in Seattle proper?
I do.
Okay.
Well, it's a suburb.
I used to live in Federal Way.
Yeah. Our office, we have two offices, one downtown, one in Redmond. I'm near the Redmond office.
Okay. Favorite TV show?
Oh, I like British crime shows.
Okay.
I don't watch it on TV. You watch them now on the Hulu and the Netflix.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah,
which you can't do in the UK. I tried to watch Hulu while I was there.
Right.
I was in Cambridge last week and I couldn't watch it.
The British are so much better at plotting. They just they're a lot of our television is kind of thin and vapid, but British plots are so much more interesting. So,
yes.
So I got a bunch of British crime shows I love.
Trapped on an island with only the sermons of one preacher. Who do you choose?
Martin Lloyd-Jones.
Oh, nice pick. Lewis or Tolkien?
Lewis. I shouldn't say this, but
no.
I always get bogged down trying to read the
Lord of the Rings.
The Lord of the Rings.
Insufferable.
Yeah, and then and then I think, well, I shouldn't watch the movie before I read the books.
No.
But and then
the movies are terrible too.
People scold me, so I'm going to make another run at it. But I love Lewis, and my favorite book of Lewis's is The Great Divorce.
Oh, classic. Have you done The Hobbit?
That's where I got bogged down. It was Bilbo Baggins. Yeah.
Okay.
People have told me just skip over that and start The Lord of the Rings. So
no, Lord of the Rings is worse.
Okay.
Oh, it's way worse. I love The Hobbit.
Oh, really? Okay.
Couldn't do Lord of the Rings. Can't get out of the first book. Are you an audiobook guy at all? That's a no. I can tell.
Yeah. I listen to the Bible audio. I love. Now, I'm not a King James only person, and I know that I know some people have actually been very hurt by a rigid King James only churches.
Yeah. It's really dangerous.
It's sad.
Yeah.
But I do love Alexander Scorby's reading of the King James. He brings it alive, and I know it's not the translation based on the earliest manuscripts, but the English is quite beautiful if it's read in a way that helps you understand that for example, meat is not just
right. It's food.
It's food in general,
right.
not just a kind of meat, not just flesh.
It took me a while to figure that one out.
Right. So, no, but anyway, I do like to listen to the Bible on tape. Right.
Favorite novel? You ever read any fiction?
I do. It's Lewis. I like the Space Trilogy.
Yeah.
And several of his
surprisingly relevant today.
Yes, it is. Yeah. The Hideous Strength is a prescient exposition of the dangers of scientific materialism.
Every time you turn around, Lewis has already beat you to that corner.
Oh, yeah.
So funny. Yeah. Go ahead. Were you going to say something?
Well, he had some great insights into the distinction between laws and causes that justify a belief that miracles can occur without violating the laws of nature.
Okay.
A miracle is an act of God. It's an event, not a law-like pattern of events.
Mm-hmm.
And so miracles are possible if there is a God to act. And he had a little essay in God in the Dock that explicated this, that influenced both John Lennox and me, by the way.
Oh.
So There's a lot more to say about that, but these are supposed to be short answers.
Yeah,
So I'll stop.
Mountains or beach?
Probably beach. I'm a compulsive swimmer, including cold water. Yeah,
Really?
cold water swimmer.
So like when you're in the UK, are you going to go out in the North Sea? And
We have done the North Sea. We have gone into the sea at St. Andrews, which is cold. My limit's about 42 degrees Fahrenheit.
Do you wear a wetsuit?
Yeah, now I do.
Okay,
I'm older, but I used to really like Yoho Lake in going hiking up to the Burgess Shale. Hot day in the summer of, what was it, 2002 or so, and everybody was hot. I went in. This the beautiful green aquamarine colored water in the glacier.
Freezing.
Water. It couldn't have been much above 40, and everybody else was miserable the rest of the day. And I had this wonderful subcutaneous tingle the rest of the day. It was like my own personal air conditioning. So
that's one way to say it. Yeah. Subcutaneous.
Where I typically swim now is Whidbey Island, where it's about it's mid 50s in the summer, which is not too bad.
That's pretty bad. Champagne or wine?
A little champagne is nice. Yeah.
This is the most.
I will tell you though, I'm a lightweight with alcohol. I can't take very much, and if I have not eaten, it will go right to my head. So I never drink very much, and if I do, I like champagne and a little white wine, but I'm usually only use that as sleeping medicine.
Okay. Least favorite candy?
I hardly eat candy. Well, I do now like some chocolate.
But like the worst candy, for example, black licorice.
Yeah, that's awful. Stuff that's really sweet, I don't like.
Yeah, too much. Yeah. Okay. Drive or fly?
Fly.
Morning person or night owl?
Night owl.
Take a risk or play it safe?
I'm a risk taker.
Mayonnaise or mustard?
Mustard on hot dogs?
Can't do it.
No?
You got to choose one. You can only have one.
Oh, I never do mayonnaise. I only mustard, but only on hot dogs.
Text message or email?
Text.
Dog or cat?
We now have a grand dog. I've never had pets, and we do have a very sweet little grand dog. So I do have one dog that I like. I have no cats that I like.
Okay. Well, nobody should ever have cats that they like. Night out or night in?
Both. I got to choose one.
You got to choose one, man.
Given how much I've been traveling, maybe I really look forward to a night out.
Okay. This is a very American question.
Okay.
Burger King or McDonald's?
Neither.
Okay.
Of the two, probably McDonald's because I'll eat a fish sandwich.
That's the worst thing you can get at a McDonald's. Yeah. Okay. Kindle, hard copy, or audiobook?
Oh, hard copy so I can write on the pages.
Oh, you got to write in the pages. Yeah. Certain books are narrated so well that doing them on audio is a truly incredible experience. Like Andy Serkis, the guy who did Gollum in Lord of the Rings, he narrates The Hobbit.
Okay.
It's a transcendent, immersive experience. I couldn't believe how good it was.
Maybe that's the way I finally mastered Tolkien is listening. I've been thinking it's reading or watching. Maybe it's listening.
I think it is. Not Lord of the Rings with The Hobbit.
Now, I know lots of people that would differ with us on that. But,
they can be wrong.
Yeah.
Mexican, Italian, or Asian food?
All good. Italian the best.
Sounded like you were going to say Mexican.
Yeah.
Football, basketball, baseball. Baseball?
I did the 3B sports, baseball, basketball, and boxing.
Oh, you box?
Yes, I did. Oh. And between baseball and basketball, right now I've been more baseball was my first and truest love.
But I wonder how much smarter you'd be without some of that CTE from boxing.
Well, that was where I was 30 and I was offered the middleweight position at Cambridge, and I had a Russian coach right out of college.
Okay,
and so I learned a lot of technique, and I got invited. I met the captain of the Cambridge squad in a graduate seminar on the philosophy of mind. Mm-hmm. I noticed his boxing gear sitting at his feet across the aisle in the classroom. So I asked him about it afterwards, and so he invited me to come to the. He said, "What do you?" He actually said, "This is Cambridge." He said, "Oh, do you practice the noble art?" I said, "You mean like fighting?"
Yeah. Do I hit people in the face?
Yeah. So I started. He invited me that night. I thought we would be hitting the bag and skipping rope and doing, preparatory training. But they had the ring set up, and he said, "Well, let's try you out." So he had me get in, and he was a light heavyweight and 6'3", and
Yeah.
I'm maybe was a middleweight or a light middleweight if I was in good shape. So he started sort of pounding on me. But the one thing I learned from the Russian coach was defense. So I survived the onslaught.
Nice.
I don't think I hurt him very much. But then I started training, and they offered me the position, and I came home, and I'm 30, and there was a fight coming up with the British Air Force, I think, and I come home and I tell my wife, I'm all kind of feel all flattered to have been chosen, and she says, she just turned white, blanched, and she said, famous words, "I thought we came over here to develop the brain cells."
Yeah, right.
And then she said, "How good are these guys?" I said,
"Pretty good."
"Well, we don't know." So we had to rethink about it, and I ended up finishing the season training the guy underneath me who was what they called the Tiger class, the junior varsity, and he was a tall, skinny British kid who was going to get killed. And so I started to teach him what I learned from the Russian coach.
Yeah.
And he then took the match against Oxford, and he got a draw. So that was
not bad.
My one achievement in boxing was helping another young man keep from getting hurt. So
there you go.
His mother owes me.
Yeah, she does.
Yeah.
All right. This is again a very American question, but you go to a Mexican restaurant, do you go queso, salsa, or guacamole?
Guacamole.
Yeah, baby. Chinese takeout or sushi?
Yeah, Chinese.
Would you rather be cold or hot? Sounds like cold.
Cold.
Rock or rap?
Rock. I have no interest in rap. Although we have two great rock artists who have who've done raps, intelligent design raps.
Oh yes, yes.
And I just had a visit from one, Chris Sando. He actually has some really good stuff. So I've been kind of my horizons have been broadened by rap guys who like our work.
Some of the Christian hip hop guys, I think, are some of the best poets I've ever encountered.
Well, there's a slam poet who really like. We actually have on my website have a playlist of intelligent design in poem and verse.
Wow.
Yeah. So
you guys are covering every field, man.
I am not hip, so
So you can't hop.
I'm not hip, so I can't hop.
Yeah. Classical or jazz?
Dixieland jazz was my grandfather's go-to. He played with Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman. He jammed with Louis Armstrong.
Oh.
He was in that big band era, and that was a great era because the color line was breaking down in America, and it was the musicians that were doing it first. So the Dixieland jazz that was coming out of New Orleans, and the swing music that was coming off of the Plain States, and the white and the black musicians during that era all found each other. They all admired each other. They all loved each other, and they all, so there was a kind of a fusion thing that would go on. So that kind of jazz I liked. More contemporary jazz lacks the melodic character of that earlier jazz, where you had melody, but you had improvisation, but it was always variation on a melodic theme that you could discern. And some of more current jazz has lost that, I think. So
it's. I mean, it feels like it's just the result of postmodernism influencing art for the worse
across the board. You have that. Do like some classical music, but my son, who's a composer, is having to teach me what to like. So,
just quick rant. Have you been to while you're in town? Have you been to the Museum of Modern Art?
I haven't. No.
Okay, so. There's the Smithsonian, kind of there's Rembrandt and all that other stuff there. And then you have the Museum of Modern Art. Going from one to the other, the contrast creates such a clarity. Mm-hmm. This stuff, whether you like the particular aesthetic or not, is beside the point. It's gorgeous, it's masterful. And then you go into the modern art section and it's trash. It's nothing. It's utterly devoid of meaning. Sometimes the shapes may come together to form a cool pattern, but other than that,
it's an expression of an underlying tendency towards nihilism that flows out of the scientific materialist worldview that we're challenging. And this was Francis Schaeffer's great point: is that ideas have consequences and they're expressed artistically.
Yeah. Oh, I miss Francis Schaeffer. I never knew him, but we need more Francis Schaeffers these days. Trapped on an island with only one systematic theology. What do you choose?
I don't like systematic theology.
Oh, okay.
I think systematic theology almost inevitably leaves something biblical out. The attempt to overly systematize the teachings of the Bible often lose necessary paradoxical elements out, like election and human freedom, and so I typically don't like systematic theology.
Well, let's change the question then. One Christian work that you can take with you if you're trapped on an island. This is the work you're going to read for the next 30 years until you die on the island. Not to be morose.
John Sailhamer's work on, and I'm forgetting the title because I've just started it, but it's fascinating.
On Genesis?
No, it's about
the Pentateuch?
It's a defense of the Christological reading of the Old Testament. And my favorite biblical passage is a passage in Luke 24 where Jesus is on the road to Emmaus, and it says that the text says, and beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he began to teach them all the things written concerning himself.
Yeah.
And there I see what I always tell my students, the most exciting thing I know is the evident design in the biblical text itself, that the Old and the New Testament form one integrated communication system, and yet there are 40 different authors, 66 different books,
over 1,000,
and yet you have this coherency of message from beginning to end that I do not think can be adequately accounted for by the contributions of the different writers writing at different times in different genres, oftentimes either not knowing of the other writings or not having a full understanding of the multiple layers of meaning in the other authors. And that's where what I call this the messianic convergence, because when Christ comes on the scene, his teachings, his life, his death, even his resurrection, unlocks hidden or cryptic meaning in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, in the Tanakh. And that essentially means that Christ functions as a kind of cryptographic key that unlocks this coherency of meaning. So his doing so is an additional evidence of his messianic credentials, as is his fulfillment of explicit prophecy.
Sure.
A
great example of this is in the conversion of the Ethiopian eunuch. So Philip is directed by the Lord to go out to him. He sees him in the chariot. The Lord says, go up to him. He finds him reading Isaiah, and he says, do you understand what you're reading? And he goes, how can I, unless someone explains it to me? And then Luke says, the author of Acts, he says, beginning with this scroll, he began to teach him basically Christ. But beginning
there's
here,
an echo of what the Cleopas and the other disciple heard Jesus say on the road to Emmaus, right?
Which of course is at the end of Luke, and Acts is really Luke.
That's a good
part
connection.
2.
Here's my go-to example to illustrate this. You have Genesis 22, the Abraham and Isaac story account, and you get to the point where Abraham, in obedience to God, is raising the knife, ready to sacrifice Isaac, and the messenger of God intervenes and says, "Now I know that you love me, Abraham, for you did not spare your son, your only son." And the rabbis correctly scratched their head about this for thousands of years, and still do today, the Orthodox, because Yahweh expressed condemnation for all forms of child sacrifice. Remember the Jeremiah 9 passage where he said, "You did what it did not even enter my mind to prohibit this, that the killing of your own children." So how could Yahweh, who hates child sacrifice, have pushed Abraham to the brink? And I think the answer comes when God sacrifices his own son, likely on the same mountain or very close. And you then realize in retrospect that you did not spare your son, your only son, is a divine double entendre that has been left hanging for 2,000 years, awaiting its resolution in the appearance of the one who would sacrifice himself for our sins and take away the sin of the world.
That's a good one.
But that's the way. That's an example of how the life of Christ, as recorded in the Gospels, unlocks hidden or cryptic meaning, which means that the writer of Genesis and even the writers of the Gospels, unless they're fully aware of all of these connections, and I don't think they are, biblical scholars are discovering them right up to the present. Biblical scholarship is dynamic.
It is,
and so
it's getting cooler every day. By the way, some of these connections.
Yeah. So I think there's there's clearly an evidence of design there because the fit of the messages from the different books is extraordinary and uncanny. Have you seen the diagram that Jordan Peterson has online of the Bible is the first hyperlinked document, showing all the connections between the different books and the way one book illuminates the meaning of another and vice versa. And, so it's clearly a design system, but the design could not be the consequence of the human authors because they're writing at different times. They don't understand everything the other authors have written, and you often can't understand much of this hidden meaning until you have the benefit of retrospect of not only Christ's coming, but the benefit of 2,000 years of reflection on that, where you begin to see all these connections. So that suggests that the Bible is the consequence of an intelligent designer, but one who must in the present tense transcend the ability of the human authors to have engineered the design, and must transcend the limitations of time and space. Yeah. Okay. I always tell my students that's the most exciting thing I know.
Yeah, I love it. Is that how you get every class going?
That's my concluding lecture. Okay. I have a 3-part sequence on the Messianic convergence.
Nice. Last 2 questions.
That was not a short answer.
No, you're fine. Yeah. What hymn would you like to be sung at your funeral?
I haven't thought of that. I like the one. I'm the non-musician in my family, surrounded by musicians. My wife is extremely talented. She does a kind of Celtic Christian folk fusion. And she has a tremendous gift for interpretation. I might one of my favorites from her album was I Heard the Voice of Jesus Say. I like the melancholic Scottish Celtic things. Mm-hmm. That would be a good choice.
Yeah. If you like melancholic stuff.
Minor chords, minor stuff, yeah.
So I was with some missionaries recently who first served in Russia. Mm-hmm. And they showed me the Russian hymn book that basically is standard across the country there. And all of the songs are in minor keys.
Is that right?
And they are all incredible. I could listen to those hymns all day. Now, I tend to have a more melancholic personality.
Well, me too. But our poor Russian friends had such a tragic history. And
they have a good reason.
But the Celts too, they were pushed to the margins of the British Isles by the invading. What was it? Oh, you were in
Anglos or
the Jutes and the Saxons and the Angles. Yeah, they were more dominant peoples. And
the history of Britain is just like different people coming in, conquering, pushing. You have different people coming in, conquering, pushing out. Yeah. Which is why our language is essentially a junk drawer.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. Most important question. You messed this up. This whole interview is for naught.
All right.
How many holes does a straw have?
Well, I would say 2, but am I wrong?
Yeah.
Am I? How many?
1.
1? Oh, it's all connected. Is that the point? Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's anticlimactic.
Well, you got me.
I got it. I showed you. Yeah, I made you look silly.
Stump the scientist. Yeah,
that's right. Well, brother, that's all I have.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, let me close in prayer one more time.
Thanks a lot.
Father, thank you for my brother Stephen. What a gift it is the way that you bring different people with different skills and different proclivities and different gifts into the church to build up the body of Christ and to even lay ground for people to intellectually grapple with the gospel. We pray that you'll bless his labors. Most importantly, help him to be holy in his walk with you. Help him to be a good husband and a good father. Help him to be a good churchman and a good neighbor, so that all of the academic work that he's doing is further adorned with good works in light of the gospel that he believes. Bless his efforts in every way and raise up more Stephen C. Meyers who can continue to do these kinds of things for the glory of your name, for the good of the church, and for the love of our neighbors. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.